So now I'd like to look at the Dudaei Reuven and Parshas Ekev. Dudaei Reuven tells us as follows. He comments on the first verse of Parshas Ekev, and that is really a commentary. What does the word Ekev mean? It says, V'haya Ekev Tishmaru. And the word Ekev is not really easy to understand here. So usually most like literal commentaries translate it's like, if you will indeed listen to these words and you guard them and do them, then God will watch for you his covenant and the kindness that he swore to your fathers. According to this, the word Ekev means truly. Well, Rashi takes a different approach. Rashi says, Ima mitzvos hakalo sha'adam dash be'ekav tishmaru. Rashi says that the word Ekev comes from the heel of a foot, like Yaakov. If you guard, Rashi says, the minor commandments that a person typically tramples on with his heel, if you guard even those commandments, then God will listen to you. And this is based upon, this is Rashi's explanation. So the Dudaei Reuven says, I don't understand what Rashi is saying. He says, we have to go into great depth here to understand what is Rashi talking about here. If you guard those commandments which a person typically steps on with their heel, then God will provide for you the covenant. So first thing we have to understand is, what does it mean, the minor commandments that a person steps on with their heel? That as a result of these commandments, Hashem will watch the covenant. Are there really minor commandments? And second of all, are these minor commandments really more worthy than the more strict commandments? And so it's a result of the minor commandments, God will keep his covenant. It should be as a result of the stricter commandments that God would keep the covenant. So why is it saying, because of if you don't step on the minor commandments, God will keep his covenant with you? It should say if you don't violate the strict commandments, if we even agree that there are minor commandments. And so therefore, what does it also mean a person steps on with his heel? What does that concept mean? Furthermore, there is a classic Mishnah from Pirkei Avot where it states, be very careful with a minor commandment like a strict commandment. Be very careful with the minor commandments like the severe commandments, because you do not know the reward of the commandments. So the Mishnah is warning us and telling us that we have to keep both the minor commandments and the strict commandments. So why is our Rashi saying, be careful with the minor commandments? When the Mishnah is very specific, you have to keep both because you don't know the reward for either one. And so therefore, why does our Rashi saying that a minor commandment is more important? That you have to make sure you don't step on it with your heel, when specifically the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says you have no idea of the reward of the minor commandments or the more severe ones. And then there's another Mishnah in Pirkei Avot in chapter 4, which tells us, Ben Azai says, run to do a minor commandment and run away from a sin. And the reason is because one mitzvah leads to another mitzvah and one sin leads to another sin. That the reward for a mitzvah is a mitzvah, and the compensation for a sin is another sin. And this is a very strange teaching also, because why does Ben Azai say run to a mitzvah? Because reward for a mitzvah, because a mitzvah causes another mitzvah. Why doesn't he just say run to do a mitzvah? Because and run away from a sin, because one is a mitzvah, one is a sin. Why does he say run to do a mitzvah? Because that causes another mitzvah, and run away from a sin because that causes another sin. Why doesn't he just say run to do a mitzvah because it's a mitzvah, and run away from a sin because it's a sin? Why is he getting here with all these explanations? So the Dudaei Reuven says, what is a minor mitzvah? And he gives a very, very beautiful essay here on the power of a minor mitzvah. What's a minor mitzvah? He says, now, well, I'm going to put this out to you. What do you think a minor mitzvah is? I'm asking you that question. What do you think a minor mitzvah is? I'm going to pause here. So Dudaei Reuven says, what's a minor mitzvah? He says, a minor mitzvah. Now, at first I would think, okay, let's say a minor mitzvah is, listen, maybe washing your hands in the morning, or I don't know, you could do something. You could think about a mitzvah. Okay. No. And minor mitzvah is a mitzvah that you don't do with the right intent. Maybe you have the wrong intent. And so, like maybe you go to the Torah class only because you know that at the Torah class, they're going to give you pizza. You don't go to learn the Torah. So you're going for the wrong intent. You're going for the pizza, not for the Torah. So that's called a mitzvah that you did with the wrong intent. That's called a minor mitzvah, says the Dudaei Reuven. And so what the Dudaei Reuven says is such a clever answer. So a minor mitzvah is a mitzvah you do with the wrong intent. And in contrast to this, there is a concept in Jewish law of a sin that you do with the right intent. It's called an Avero Lishma. So what's an Avero Lishma? So the classic answer in the Talmud is like the case of Esther marrying Achashverosh to save the Jewish people. To make something more relatable to us, you steal from a company because you want to give the money to poor people. So you're doing a sin, but you say, I'm doing it for the right reason. I have really good intent. You know what I'm saying? I'm doing this sin for the right reason. So there's a mitzvah that you do for the wrong reason, and a sin that you do for the right reason. And at first, the Gemara wanted to argue that a sin for the right reason is actually greater than the mitzvah for the wrong reason. But they said, but the Gemara challenges that because we have a principle that a mitzvah done for the wrong reason is actually greater than is great, because a person will eventually come to do it for the right reason. And so therefore the Gemara then concludes that they're equal. So a sin done with the right intent is actually equivalent to a mitzvah done with the wrong intent. He's going to qualify that in a moment. But that's what he says at this point. And he quotes a text from Reuven that basically reinforces this idea. So therefore we're saying that a sin for the right intent is equivalent to a mitzvah done with the wrong intent. And he says, okay, now let's go back to this position of Ben Azai. What did Ben Azai say in Pirkei Avot? Ben Azai said, run to a minor mitzvah and run away from a sin, because a mitzvah causes another mitzvah and a sin causes another sin. And his question was, well, why don't you just say run to the mitzvah because it's a mitzvah, and run away from the sin because it's a sin? He says you can't say that, because what are we talking about? We're talking about a mitzvah that you're doing with the wrong intent, and that's equivalent to the sin that you're doing with the right intent. So you might say, well, it doesn't matter which one I do. It doesn't matter which one I do. It doesn't matter if I do the sin or if I do the mitzvah. They're spiritually equal. Doing a mitzvah with the wrong intent, let's say I'm going to the synagogue just to get to Kiddush or just to see my friends, is equivalent to doing the sin with the right intent. Whatever the sin with the right intent is. You might say they're equivalent. So what does it matter which one I do? Today I'll do this one, tomorrow I'll do that one. He says, no. Ben Azai says, run to the mitzvah, meaning say run to do the mitzvah even though you're doing it with the wrong intent, before you do the sin with the right intent. Why? Why? What's the reason? Because even though their spiritual value is the same, and this is his point, even though their spiritual value is the same, the result of it is going to be fundamentally different. If you run to do the mitzvah, even though it has the wrong intent, that will cause you to do more mitzvahs. You'll be going from one mitzvah to another mitzvah, meaning to say you're going to get the big momentum that you run to the mitzvah with the wrong intent, eventually you'll be doing the mitzvahs with the right intent. Whereas if you do the sin, even with the right intent, it's still at the end of the day something wrong. And that's going to cause you to eventually do more sins and more sins. And that's what Ben Azai was saying. Run to do a mitzvah, even a minor mitzvah, even when you're doing without the right intent, because that will cause you to do more mitzvahs. Whereas the sin that you're doing with the right intent will lead you down a very, very dangerous spiritual path. Lead you down a very, very dangerous spiritual path. So yeah, I'll pause for a second while Theora asks a question. Okay, so the Dudaei Reuven says, Im anu bayim ladun al mahusa shel mitzvah kala. If we want to look at what's the purpose, what's the goal of a mitzvah kala, of a minor mitzvah, hainu mitzvahs hanasit shelo lishma, i.e., these mitzvahs that are done without the proper intent, versus the mahusa, versus the essence of a sin that's done for the right reasons. So we can say, technically speaking, they're equivalent. There's no reason why we should grant more spiritual value to a mitzvah done without the proper intention versus a sin done with the proper intention. And he writes this. According to the value system that the sages established, the spiritual value of both of them is equivalent. And the Talmud says that in Horios, a sin for the right reason is the equivalent of a mitzvah for the wrong reason. There's no way to say one is better than the other. Aval, even though he says with respect to valuing one over the other, you shouldn't say that one is better. Nevertheless, there's a fundamental difference between them. And what's the difference? He says, mitzvah goreres mitzvah. The difference between them is that one mitzvah causes another mitzvah, meaning to say, even if this mitzvah was not done in the proper manner, nevertheless, it causes another mitzvah to come. And that second mitzvah will be closer to have the proper intent. And so therefore will be taking us in the right direction. Whereas the sin, even though this sin was done with the right intent, the next time you do the sin, it'll have a little less intent. And a little less each time. And so therefore, Ben Azai tells us, run always to the minor mitzvah, because that will cause you eventually to do a second and a third, which will be done right, whereas the sin will be done wrong. And says the Dudaei Reuven, and this is the part which some of you might find controversial. Some of you might say, well, this doesn't work for my life, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. Says the Dudaei Reuven, he quotes the Talmud from Avodah Zarah 35, and he says, Ki tovim dodecha miyayin. What do we do with that verse from Song of Songs? Chavivim divrei sofrim yoser miyena shel Torah. We value the words of the scribes, meaning to say rabbinic commandments more than the wine of Torah. What does that mean? Dudaei Reuven cites here the explanation of Rabbeinu Yonah from Shara Tshuva. He writes as follows. Rabbeinu Jonah, the medieval commentary from Yonah, he says, Rabbeinu Yonah writes, we should know that the foundation of all commandments is having the proper fear of God. And he quotes a verse from our portion. And now, what does Hashem ask from you? To fear God. If you don't have fear of God, you're not going to be able to do any of the commandments. And that's what Hashem wants from his creations, that we have this fear of God. But, says Rabbeinu Yonah, V'takanos chachamim, the reforms of the rabbis and their fences is the foundation of Yiras Hashem. How do we get to this fear of God? By listening to the words of the rabbis, because the rabbis made these fences so that we don't touch a prohibition of the Torah. Like a man who makes a fence around his field so you don't touch his crops. And as it states, guard my commandments. Asu mishmeret u'mishmarati, make a protection from them. And so therefore, the more reforms we make to protect us from sinning, that is the proper way. That is the proper way to demonstrate our fear of God. And the one who demonstrates more protection against sin, he's showing more and more fear of God. So therefore, why does it say, Chaviv in Divrei Sofrim, that the words of the rabbis are more precious than the wine of the Torah? Because the fundamental decrees of the rabbis demonstrate the concept of Yiras Hashem, of fear of God. And the fear of God is the source, is the foundational element of the whole Torah. And so therefore, that goes back to this fundamental idea. Meaning to say, he's now introducing another idea. What does it mean that the mitzvahs, kalos, that you typically trample on with your feet, if you guard those, then Hashem will guard your covenant? He's introducing a second idea here. It's such a powerful idea. The first idea was maintain your momentum, doing the mitzvah even without the right intent. But the second idea is guarding the rabbinic commandments. What's a mitzvah kala? A minor mitzvah is the one the rabbis told us to do. The major ones are from the Torah. The minor ones are ones the rabbis told us to do. So why is it so important that we do the ones the rabbis told us to do? Well, we have the ones of the Torah. Why if we do the ones that the rabbis told us to do, will that bring us to the covenant with God? Because the rabbis' commandments are intended to prevent us from reaching the threshold of sin. And so therefore, they're coming out of a source of tremendous awe of God. And so since they're coming out of the tremendous awe of God, they're the source of what it means to have a relationship with God. So if we guard those minor commandments, i.e. the rabbinic commandments, then we will come to the fundamental relationship with God that is essential for us to have a covenant with God. That's the concept of the Dudaei Reuven. So the Dudaei Reuven has given us two just incredibly powerful explanations of this idea of do not trample on the minor commandments. First is, even if you're doing it with the wrong reasons, with not with the right reasons, continue to do it because you're going to build the momentum that will eventually cause you to succeed by having the right covenant with God. And second, it refers to if we don't trample on the rabbinic commandments, that will instill within us the awe of God that is necessary to have a tremendous relationship with Hashem Yisparach. And that's why if we don't step on these so-called minor commandments, we'll be able to have the momentum, the spiritual momentum necessary to have a meaningful relationship with Hashem. That's the two essence of the Dudaei Reuven about the minor commandments. Of course, he has so much more, but I can't give you everything from him. You have to read some of it. Of course, we need him to be translated. That's a different story. I will stop here if anybody has any questions.